Hello, welcome to another edition of I'm Bastani with me, Aaron Bastani, at Aaron Bastani on Twitter. As ever, thank you so much for watching. Today I'd like to talk about arguably two supremely disruptive politicians, Jeremy Corbyn in the United Kingdom, Bernie Sanders in the US, and how both gentlemen, paradoxically perhaps given they're older, draw upon the support, the votes, the energy, the ideas of millennials, a birth cohort aged between 18 and 34, a group of people, a sort of age group of people who seemingly are more disposed to ideas of social democracy, democratic socialism than their parents and their grandparents. So why am I talking about this today? Well, I'm talking about this today because, of course, last Monday we had the Iowa caucus in the United States. That was the first step for both Republican and Democrat parties getting their respective candidates for the presidential race later this year. For the Democrats, the only two candidates that matter, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Until late last year, Sanders was polling 30 points behind Clinton, and he achieved almost the impossible by beating her. He almost beat her. In the end, they both got just below 50%. Hillary beat him just by 2 delegates, by 0.2% of the vote. Okay, so Hillary won, that was expected. Sanders did pretty well. What was particularly interesting for me anyway, I think it's the big story of Iowa, is the breakdown of those results by age. So amongst the 18 to 34s, Sanders, you're not going to believe this, Sanders got 84% of the vote, according to entry polls, not exit polls. 84% amongst 18 to 34s. Clinton got 14%. So Sanders beats Hillary Clinton amongst 18 to 34s by 70%, margin of 6-1, right? That's pretty impressive. This is against a person who was meant to be, unrivaled. This was meant to be a coronation. He's beaten her by 6-1 amongst young people. That's incredible. And you're going, but Aaron, we've heard this before. Barack Obama, 2008, Iowa, hope, change. He was, his campaign was driven by the young. The energy then was coming from the young, these idealistic young college grads, students. Kind of true. But in Iowa 8 years ago, the exact same caucus kicked off that race too, right? Obama just beat Clinton. He got something like 53% of the vote. Amongst 18 to 34-year-olds, Obama beat her by 20%. Yeah. Sanders has beaten her by 70%. So something's really different here. He doesn't just beat her amongst 18 to 34-year-olds, where you say, well, these idealistic young people, big deal. He also beats her 30 to 44-year-olds. He beats her there. Clinton's obviously just won this. So how has she done that? Well, she beats him amongst the over 50s and more so the over 65s. Clinton gets something like 70% of over 65s, right? So this huge lead, unassailable lead that Sanders has over Clinton amongst 18 to 34s, Clinton broadly mirrors amongst the over 65s, right? So the big cleavage in terms of Sanders, Clinton, in terms of these two, I think really competing visions of what the Democrat Party could do, these two competing visions of a progressive America, it's dividing right down the line, not by race, not by gender, but by age. One particular fact that makes that particularly clear for me is this. Clinton got 60% of married women. Sanders gets something like 33%. So Clinton beats Sanders with married women in terms of support by 2-1. Now you'd expect this, right? Hillary's looking to be the first ever female president. What's amazing and rather surprising is that Sanders on unmarried women beats Clinton by 10%. So even though Clinton is looking to be the first ever female president, supremely accomplished woman, even though she's doing that, you'd expect that would get the support of a lot of women. Unmarried women, i.e. younger women, are more likely to vote for Sanders than her, which confirms my previous point, which is the big cleavage here isn't gender, isn't race, it's age. Now back to Corbyn. Where are the similarities, you're asking? I think actually there are a lot of similarities here. I mean, we saw with the data last summer when Jeremy Corbyn won the Labour leadership that registered supporters, affiliate members, party members, the younger you were, the more likely you were to vote for Corbyn. So I think amongst under 25s, it's 64% backed Corbyn. Over 60s, it's 51%. Now Corbyn, as we all know, won by a landslide. He prevailed in every category, affiliate, registered supporters and proper members. Every age cohort seems to back this guy, but the younger you get, the more likely you are to back him. What's more, since the May general election, the Labour Party has obviously grown massively. It's doubled, but the most recent data says it's doubled. But the average age of the Labour Party membership has fallen by 11 years, from 53 to 42, which is pretty amazing. Now, one can only imagine, it's a pretty good guess to say that these people are joining because of Jeremy Corbyn, right? You'd be pretty stupid to say otherwise. That they're so young suggests that, just like with Bernie Sanders, the politics of Corbyn aren't just energising the young, they're not just getting them to think, it's getting them to join, it's getting them to vote, it's getting them to knock on doors. There's an argument that says, well, all these young people supporting Corbyn and Sanders are doing so because they're idiots. They're idealistic. Young people have always been like this, so what? Well, two things. First of all, that's not necessarily true. It's the young, but it's also the young middle-aged, let's say people 30 to 44. As I said, Sanders actually wins those over Clinton in Iowa last week. I think that's borne out as well with the Corbyn data, right? Like I say, the average member is now 42. I don't just think it's the young that are joining the Labour Party. It's not just millennials, it's also the cohort slightly older than them, Gen Xers, let's say people in their 30s, early 40s. I think actually what we're saying about millennials is also true for them. But not just that, even if you accept, okay, well, young people are stupid, they always vote for the most idealistic, most gregarious, energetic, angry candidate, whatever. Even if you believe all that, okay, which I don't actually believe, even if you believe that, fine, but they're actually participating in the political process. And that's new. That's new, right? They've always been, they're not just out with the placards, they're not just tweeting. They're doing that as well, by the way, right? It's not an either or. They're not just doing that, but they're also participating in formal political processes, both in the United States with Sanders and in the UK with Jeremy Corbyn. These are both older white guys. Sanders is incredibly 74 years old. I mean, well under half his age, would not have the energy to do what he's doing. He's 74, Jeremy Corbyn 66. They also are very accomplished in terms of policy. They really know what they're talking about, yeah? Look at Sanders on income inequality or finance regulation. Look at Corbyn on Trident or austerity or some bits of foreign policy. They really know what they're talking about. That really stood out, by the way, in the Sky hustings, you may remember, for the Labour leadership election last summer. You had Jeremy Corbyn next to Liz Kendall, Yvette Cooper, Andy Burnham. He stood out. He knew so much more than they did. He was so much better at speaking than they were. Why is that the case for him? Why is it the case with Sanders? Well, look, these guys have come from social movement backgrounds, really. They've been addressing crowds and groups for the best part of 20, 30 years. They're very good at it. They're much better at it, actually, than most conventional politicians who've come through party machines, right? There's that. In addition to that, why do they know all this stuff? They've been talking about it for 30, 40 years. Jeremy Corbyn, 1983, arrested at an anti-apartheid protest. Bernie Sanders, 1963, the Martin Luther King speech, I Have a Dream? He was there. He was in Washington. Do you know how old Barack Obama was? 2 years old. Bernie Sanders was supporting the Black Civil Rights Movement. So of course this guy has experience and knowledge coming out of every pore of his skin. It's seeping out of him. So why are millennials so radical? What's going on? I would say that with the economics of this stuff since the crisis, they're very precarious. Their pay has been hit the hardest. We know that, the statistics are out there. They're underemployed. If they've got college educations, university educations, they're very disappointed. Yeah, they're the most hard-hit generation, really, economically, since you'd say the war, arguably, right? In terms of disappointment, absolutely. Probably nobody's been more disappointed than these guys coming onto the labour market since the crisis of 2008, and maybe just before as well. So they're economically stressed. They're precarious. They're also socially liberal. Yeah, and like I say, there are more millennials now in the US labour market than there are baby boomers. They're a huge, part of US society, and that explains actually changing public attitudes around same-sex marriage, trans rights, LGBTQ stuff generally, drugs. They're also, as well as being economically stressed, socially liberal, they're also multiracial, more so in the US and the UK, but it's also true here as well, right? They're less white. That's behind quite interesting politics around race. So Black Lives Matter, I'd say that's the most important social movement of the Obama presidency. Amazing, right? A liberal president, seemingly liberal president, most liberal guy since Carter, pushed to his left by a street movement. Amazing. In 2009, people were saying it was going to be the Tea Party. It wasn't. It really wasn't. It was Black Lives Matter. Why they have so much salience? It's because of millennials being such a big part now of the American conversation. And slowly but surely, they are changing American politics. But it's kind of strange, isn't it, that these two movements, both sides of the Atlantic, are being sort of powered by the energy, the activism of young people, 18 to 34s in particular, millennials, as I've said. It's weird that all that is happening, and yet they're sort of the focus of both movements, Jeremy Corbyn, Bernie Sanders, these are older guys, right? So why is that? Well, here's my explanation. The reason why Sanders or Corbyn isn't as young as Tsipras is because a whole generation of potential leaders on the left in both countries switched off from electoral politics after the Iraq War, after the foreign policy response by both countries to 9/11. They said, you know what? If this is what democracy looks like within the parameters of the Democrat Party, within the parameters of the Labour Party, I'm not interested. I think that's quite justifiable, quite honestly. And so what happened was those people moved into different kinds of politics: direct action activism, student activism, minimum wage stuff, climate justice stuff. And only now they're coming back. What we're seeing with Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn is the beginnings, I would say, of a new normal in American and British politics. Now, Sanders might not win the nomination. He's still not the favourite, right? I think Hillary probably will win. Jeremy Corbyn might not win the 2020 general election. I think that's highly unlikely. But what they represent is the political breakthrough by millennials. And I say this is a huge birth cohort. In 20 years' time, this will be the bedrock of the electorate, right? So the ideas, the beliefs, the conceptions, the motivations of this cohort matter. Yeah, they're not going to win elections now. They're not going to win elections probably in 5 years' time. But in 10, 20 years' time, they define who goes at 10 Downing Street. They define who goes into the White House. Economically stressed, socially liberal, multiracial. This group of people simply will not carry on the politics the last 10, 20 years. They will not have it, right or left. And both the Labour and the Conservative parties have to get to grips with that. We all know what the critics of Jeremy Corbyn like to say, don't we? I mean, it's boring, it's hackneyed, but I'll repeat those things anyway. He's out of touch, you know. He belongs in the 80s. He's a throwback. I don't think that could be more wrong, actually. The politics of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn are energising, inspiring young people like nothing we expected to see, let's be honest. And I think what's happening is actually far bigger than either man, and it's even bigger than their respective political parties. This birth cohort of millennials have really suffered since the crisis. They've got very liberal social attitudes, and like I say, they're multiracial. This is the beginning, I think, of a different kind of consensus to that which currently prevails. Will it win a presidential election this year? I don't know. Will it win a general election in 5 years' time? I don't know. Will it be enough to remake both Britain and America in 10, 15, 20 years' time? Absolutely.